attending a community. My name is Teck Chun. I help organize the Data Engineering Singapore meetup group. And my co-organizer, Ravindra, is away. He's in India this period. And I'm only host today. So I want to thank Rakuten for hosting us. And we have Roy here and Emily from the Rakuten team. Thank you very much. Yeah. And today we have one speaker, Adrian from Snowflake. And maybe you want to introduce yourself, Adrian, to the community.
Yeah. Hey everyone. My name is Adrian. I'm a solutions engineer based out in Singapore. Just in case you're wondering why I'm wearing a mask, I'm so sorry for actually having to convert this to online because my boy contracted COVID yesterday. Then my mom-in-law got it, and then I better quarantine myself in a room. So yeah, that's the whole reason why. Yeah. So again, apologies for it being converted last minute to virtual. But really appreciate everyone's attendance, especially at such a late hour. Yeah, back to you, Teck Chun.
Yeah, thank you. Right. All right. No worries, Adrian. I think it happens, but I think after COVID, this is quite normal. Yeah, I think it's we just pivot and it's quite seamless. But thanks to Rakuten also for reacting. Thank you very much. So today, we have one topic from Adrian, and the title is orchestrating data pipelines. So it's Snowpark, DBT, Python models, and Airflow, right? I think it'll be quite interesting. So maybe over to you, Adrian, to start the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'll kick off. As this mentioned, this meeting is virtual. So on the way, right? If let's say you have any questions you want to ask, feel free. Hopefully I mean, maybe in the next meeting or next meetup, right? We'll be there physically, so I can present other topics related to data engineering, like anything on open table formats and so forth. So today's session, right? What we'll be talking about today is orchestrating data pipelines using a combination of Snowpark, DBT, Python modules as well as Airflow. So I think just to start off with a joke I think everyone who's an ETL developer, basically, if you say want to try to get something done on Thursday, you can see that basically it will take so long for it to be actually done. Then basically by Saturday, then only is done. And that was actually the state of where it was previously. But now with the whole cloud ecosystem, being able to orchestrate your pipelines natively in the cloud, being able to leverage on the cloud to perform your data pipelines, things have actually changed quite a bit substantially in the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years. So with that, I'll just jump in to introduce everyone. Myself, for those who have actually just come in a bit later. So my name is Adrian. I'm actually a solutions engineer based out in Snowflake. Right now, I'm actually in charge of the ASEAN region. So I look after the financial services customers in Singapore. But besides that, I also handle the digital native companies around the region as well. Yeah. So I think let's start with the end in mind. And feel free to actually post any questions. I mean, if you have anything that you want to check in, feel free to actually put it in the chat channel or drop in my LinkedIn afterwards. You can ping me after that if you have any questions. But I'll start off with the end in mind. And the whole architecture here that you see here is that we are leveraging Airflow, DBT, and performing all the orchestration capabilities on Snowflake, right? Which is the core of where the whole data warehousing, the data lake is actually at. So there are different components here. It's also confusing, but don't worry, we're going to go through step by step, and later I'll be showing a demo about how it integrates and everything works together. So for the first part, let's actually start off with Airflow. And I'm making a few assumptions here, yeah. Here I'm of course making a few assumptions that generally everyone knows, like for example, data pipelines in general. But today we're going to be talking specifically about these few tools, right? And as mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to actually stop me or ask me any questions or put it in the chat. Happy to answer it. So let's start with Airflow. And for those folks on the call, right, what is Airflow? Airflow is definitely not what you see here, which is this big yellow fan, right? It's definitely not. And what is it? It's actually an open source Apache project. And it's intended, and the logo on the right is the actual one. So don't think about Airflow from a fan naturally. And what is it actually doing? So what happens is that it's an open source platform developing, scheduling, and monitoring batch-oriented workflows. I think a lot of data engineers who have used actually Airflow before, they find it very easy to use it for orchestration tools, for various workflows like analytical workflows, And basically with Airflow, what happens is that it provides clear pictures of actually dependencies. So if let's say I have one deck pointing to another deck, I can easily visualize to actually see all these workflows that actually stitched together. I think gradually what has been happening is that maybe across my job, as well as actually talking with other customers around the region, interacting with other data engineers from the US, Airflow has increasingly become very, 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 very popular as a form of open orchestration tool to help to actually orchestrate all these workflows. The reason why it's very simple is because from a baseline perspective, it's all written kind of like in Python. You just write Python operators to write it out, and you can actually stitch all of it together very easily. Later on in my code, right, we can look at a sample Airflow that just to allow everyone to understand how it works here. And with the GUI that is actually provided, right, what happens is that it's easy then to track, like, for example, the runtime of a job. You're able to actually track the logs of file, logs of the job, what has happened, the issues of it. So it's pretty fast and lean in this aspect. And as mentioned again, right, a lot of people have been using Python. So naturally with Airflow being there and it being Python-based, it's very easy to get accustomed to it and write out simple Airflow decks easily. So that's what is Airflow for those who do not know what Airflow is. For those who do know what Airflow is, pardon the 101 kind of session that I just went through to explain to the folks on the call what it is, what it isn't. Okay. So I think next we'll go on to the part where we're talking about DBT. And just a show of hands, right? I mean, you can click virtually if you like. How many of you guys have heard of DBT? Haven't heard of DBT before? Don't know what it is? Yeah. A show of hands though, how many of you guys have heard of DBT? And you can use the icon. I'm not sure if you can use the icon to show a reaction here. Yeah, you can. I think you can show a reaction here to show like whether you know DBT. I see, yep, Glenn is giving a thumbs up. So yes, probably you guys have actually heard about DBT before. I'm not sure, give me a minute. Yeah, about DBT before. Anyone else? All right, Teck Chun. No, nothing less expected from you. Definitely you know what DBT is, which is fantastic. That's great. All right, so the rest, not sure if everyone else is responding to it, but okay, seems like a few of you guys know what DBT is. A few of you guys are wondering what it does. I think the whole session today as well is to just go through what DBT is and what DBT isn't, right? So let's talk about DBT, right? And it goes back to a very fundamental thing, ETL and ELT. I think everyone has been hearing this a lot, but you can see from the picture below, same, but different. But exactly what is the difference, all right? It's not just simply they were dyslexic and then they just switched the work over. There's actually a meaning and purpose that I will go through in a while later, yeah? So coming on to here, right? I think let's talk about just as a general overflow because this leads into why DBT was built for a certain reason as well. So let's talk about ETL. I think previously everyone knows what ETL is. Like for example, you extract data from a data source, you transform it on the server or processing engine, and then you store the data on actually into let's say a destination. Now this destination typically is like a data lake, a data warehouse. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just a source destination to store all the data. The ETL does not transfer the raw data into the data warehouse, and this is something that is very important because that's the intent of actually the ETL tools out there. Now, with the whole ecosystem of the cloud coming up, you're being able to store the data natively in the cloud systems using data warehousing. That's where the whole ELT approach came from. And the whole mandate basically states that instead of us transforming the data on a different processing server, we want to transform the data natively within the warehouse or the data lake, right? And what happens is that it sends the raw data into the data warehouse directly for that purpose. Now, if we take basically, maybe I'll just give a Snowflake perspective or a Snowflake capability overview just to understand. If you look in the traditional ETL sense, you can see that there's a lot of like maybe concerns from before, like privacy concerns, complex proprietary file formats, mix of on-prem cloud products, legacy on-prem methodologies, also the skill sets that's available from that perspective. But now with the whole ELT format, right, you're able to now work seamlessly with structured table formats, structured data, semi-structured data, unstructured data all the time. You're also able to have, you're able to fully use the full cloud capability to perform all your transformations from that angle. And easily, right, you're able to then bring the whole speed and access to the raw data to your users. So with the ELT approach, you can see that basically from that angle, right, there has been a shift in terms of actually the whole demographics towards that angle. So if we look into here, right, DBT kind of solves the transformation of the ELT process. And we will go and take a look at the DBT documents. They have also stated it very clearly that they are part of the ELT process, not the ETL process. Yeah. The whole reason is that because when the data is being landed in the warehouse, it leverages on the transform process within the ELT process to transform the data. And they actually have came up with this new term called an analytical engineer, which actually does a combination of both analytics as well as data engineering together to analyze the data. Yeah. So for DBT, DBT stands for data building tool. For those folks who do not know what it stands for. And the whole purpose is that it helps to build, helps to test, and helps to maintain the data infrastructure estate. And what happens is that in the Snowflake perspective, I'm of course going to relate it back to Snowflake because naturally I'm from Snowflake, but to give everyone an idea, what happens is that it takes code, compiles it into SQL, and runs against Snowflake. The idea here as well, maybe just to also give an overview, is that DBT has very deep relationships with Snowflake. We have partnered way back on. That's why a lot of the things that they have actually developed, they were meant for Snowflake purposes as well. You can see that why people have been using DBT, simple, is that one is repeatable code. I can actually use the same code modules, right, to build my data pipelines. The other aspect is that it supports macros. Code switching configurations are easily achievable using Ginger templates. So for the folks who do not know what a Ginger template is, basically in Python, right, we have something called a templating in which we're able to parameterize values inside a Ginger template and use that as part of actually the SQL process. So instead of writing a for loop to actually, instead of writing like, for example, 100 SQL statements, we can use actually a Ginger template to templatize it and write the for loop to actually do the SQL statements. So that it makes it very easy from a templating perspective. Now, if we look in terms of actually the whole DBT process, there's actually three aspects of DBT, or okay, not three aspects, but actually there's three flows of DBT. And for those folks who, again, do not know what DBT is or what it is, I'm just going to go through a very quick overview of what it does. So DBT works on what we call models, right? And in terms of actually the whole DBT process, there's a write, layer, run, as well as document, all right? For that, right, what happens is that firstly, you have DBT write models. And DBT model is a SQL.SQL file, single.SQL file. It has a select statement, and you can see here from the sample code that I just put here, I'm doing a select from, let's say, a source name and a table name, and that is being parameterized inside there. The DBT is code is equivalent to your SQL and Ginger, which is the common templating language, which I discussed before. Now, once you have this single SQL statements, what happens is that this models, right, the layers on top, you can reference each other. So just imagine, right, just now that select star from source name, table name, that is under model A.SQL, right? There's a file there. What happens is that B.SQL, right? We can do a ref model A. So it makes it very easy for me then to actually reference different models. I do not need to go and like do a subquery within this and then try and remember, okay, what do I do in my subquery and try to expand the SQL statement and get lost in there. So you don't need to do that already. With DBT, we can easily reference different models within the same SQL statement. And what happens is that DBT is smart enough, right, to create the natural dependencies, and it determines the model execution order. So when that happens, right, you can see that it achieves towards the target state. You're able to actually then be able to, you let DBT kind of like handle the job in terms of actually building out the whole back-end stuff, building out the dependencies of what models reference to what models, and you just literally just need to write your SQL code. And naturally what happens is that when you DBT write one command to rule it all, as it suggested, you do a DBT run, it creates a DAG, you can do parallel execution. The cool thing about DBT as well is that DBT also has a lineage, right? You're able to actually have a whole lineage graph when you actually write out a document, and you can actually see the nice transformations when the data is actually moving from, let's say, one layer to another layer to another layer, and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, right, that is actually the whole DBT landscape here. What it does, overview of how it works, right? Now, what happens is that the state of DBT, up until now, it was primarily SQL-based transformations until it supported Python, right? And right now, you're able to write a Python code in DBT. For those folks who do not know that, you're able to write a Python code in DBT and use Python models, right, to actually then run it against the data warehouse. So this is actually in conjunction, right? And this was built, DBT, fun fact actually, DBT actually invested into this or tried to look more into this was because Snowflake came up with the whole running a Python concept. And what happens is that they then partner to see how they can actually build this out to help customers to actually run Python more efficiently from the angle, because we also take note that a lot of data engineers out there, while they are accustomed to SQL, they are also very happy with using Python. So that's why they actually invested in the whole Python module, configuring Python modules, materializations in Python modules for DBT. And we'll go and take a look a bit into the code later to show you exactly how that DBT file looks like. Okay, so I think also just as well just to allow everyone to understand, while we actually have the whole capability of actually outside in your different tools and systems inside Snowflake as well, what happens, there are different ways to actually ingest the data as well as do the transformation. Now you can see on the right, the primary one that we'll be talking about today is a Snowpark that you see on the top right-hand corner, which is basically Python being able to run into Snowflake. So that's what it means in a nutshell. But in Snowflake, there are other different capabilities that you can see here. There are supports like data formats like Iceberg, batch copy, Snowpipe streaming, Kafka, so on and so forth. I won't go into all those items because I don't think that's the intent of today. We're going to really focus more on the transformation aspect about the data within Snowflake and how we leverage Python running on Snowflake to do the transformation. Okay, so this here is just a kind of like a graph or like a heat map, just to allow everyone to understand that from the full data ingestion to transformation to the observability, what you can do within Snowflake. Okay, so this arrives in our third part of the architecture here. And the third part of the architecture here, right, is that we are going to be leveraging on something called Snowpark. So what happens here is that you may be wondering, okay, what is this Snowpark thing? I never heard about it before. I don't know what it does. What is it? So essentially what Snowpark is that instead of previously before like you running Python on like your individual servers or your individual laptops or your VMs, right? What happens is that now we're allowing customers to push the Python code to Snowflake to perform the processing. So you can see here that we are actually moving the server-side code into the client side. All the data frames, everything are all being managed within Snowflake using what we call temporary data frames. Right, native data frames in Snowflake. And the Python engine that actually is running in Snowflake, right, is on the server side, right? So then after that, you offload a lot of actually the computational power to Snowflake to actually do these actually actionable items. This is the exact part that I would say that is actually working in tandem with actually the DBT side. This is the part that the DBT models is working with, right, to actually do the push down to Snowflake to actually do the whole processing on Snowflake using Python aspect. Yeah. So from here, right, you can see here that this is where the whole ecosystem of Snowpark being able to run actually helps you create that capability where you can offload more actually Python jobs onto Snowflake. So I'm just going to take a pause here. If there's any questions, feel free to voice out, ask any questions. I'm happy to take 1 or 2 questions on the go before I carry on. Yeah. Any questions so far?
Hello, could you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I want to ask that you mentioned that the Java code runs on server side on Snowpark, right?
Yeah.
If I want to run a self-defined UDF, so I need to import the Java file in the server side, right?
Correct. Yes, you're right. Correct. You're right on this. So basically, whatever runs in Snowflake, we run it as terms as UDF functions. We also have user-defined table functions. But essentially, you're right. You need to import the Java file into Snowflake, right, to be able to run there. Yeah, correct. For the Python aspect, what happens is that we are working with Snowflake, Anaconda, and Anaconda already has released kind of like quite a lot of the Python libraries, right, on Snowflake. So the data engineers just need to call the Python library when they're building out their DAX or their Python workflows. Yeah, so correct. Does that address your question?
Okay, yes, thank you.
All right, no problems, Aaron. Any other questions from the from the audience? It can be anything up until here. I mean, I'll just maybe move back a bit also to look at DBT. Any other questions here on, or just pause maybe on this slide because we're on this part, which is stage 3. I just want to see if anyone has any questions on like 1 and 2 before I carry on further. Anything on DBT, anything on Airflow? Everyone is good? Okay, great. All right, so I will proceed on. If there's no more questions, if there are any questions, feel free to put it in the chat channel there. I will pick it up once I'm done with my presentation, or as mentioned right along the way, feel free just to stop me and ask any questions if you like. Yeah. Okay. So let's just carry on. Right. Purpose for Snowpark for Python basically is that streamline architecture. You're able to build those single pipelines within Snowflake. The other thing is that you have optimized pipelines that you can actually leverage on Snowflake for actually using the whole performance engine. Also, as mentioned, there's near zero maintenance lah. And with the task stacks, then you can track it out all slowly within, or you can track it out easily within Snowflake. And lastly is that you can act as you're able to actually have consistent governance, right, and controls across all your workflows, across all your data pipelines lah. Yeah. So you can see that actually with the streamlined architecture here, with the users, right, they're able to just actually call the related SQL functions, the Java UDF, the Python UDF onto Snowflake, one single platform, and it supports the different languages that you're able to run. As mentioned, this Python is not some magical Python thing that Snowflake brands and say that it's our stuff. Essentially, it's open source Python. The framework, right, is very similar to Spark. So if you have used like PySpark before, it's very, very similar in terms of the syntax. Like for example, calling a data frame, manipulating the data frame is it is quite similar in that regard. The whole issue here, whole context here, as mentioned again, is that with Snowflake, then you can have the whole capacity management, you're able to streamline your architecture, you have to be able to have one collaboration on the same data, like consistent governance and policies. Yeah. So using DBT with Snowpark Python modules, and this is the fun part, what happens is that Python-based models in DBT actually leverage on Snowflake's Python support and Snowpark APIs. So as mentioned before, the whole reason why this came about was that actually when we came up with Snowpark, DBT then was like, because we are in contact with the DBT guys in US, so they were also very interested about how to actually develop this framework. And that's why they came up with the whole DBT Python-based models. Now, just to inform everyone, right, the DBT Python-based models, from what I know, they work with Snowflake, but I believe they do work with the data warehouses from that context. You can use it for other things, but just sharing with you how the whole ecosystem formed from that angle. Now, for Snowpark for Python, right, with the DBT models, what happens is it includes like Python data frame APIs. So I think this was to address, like, for example, Aaron's question just now. Besides running it as a UDF and a batch UDF and a scalar UDF, you have UDTS, stored procedures, and data frame APIs. The data frame APIs in the backend, right, natively converts it within SQL, right, to Snowflake's engine, right, to be able to run on top. So that's what happens in terms of the DBT Snowpark Python models that we're running on top. I see there are 2 questions. Let me just take a pause here. And not a large compute that any Python. Yeah. So for this, right, good question. I think Joshi has a question here about handling about compute requirements about the Python model training. So yes, in Snowflake, what happens is that there are related model training. Okay, for now, what happens is that usually the model training, we put it outside to do the model training. Once we train the model, we pick up the file and put it back into the staging area and leverage that. But what happens is that there's going to be something announced next week in Snowflake, right, that allows you to do GPU computing, right? But I won't spoil the news. That is for next week, right? If you guys are invested and looking at Snowflake, you can see that there's going to be something related to the whole GPU LLM space that's coming to the services layer. Yeah. So hope that answered your question, Joshi. But for now, at this point in time, we work more with like SageMaker, right? Train the models, and then once the model is ready, we put it back within Snowflake, right? So that the model can be run against the data. Yeah, that's the current state for now.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, hope that helps. And I'll continue if there's no other questions here. So, technical architecture, and this will be the fun part here. Now, you can see that basically in the background, right, what happens is that I'm going to just show you my code later on what it does. Everything within our pipeline and stuff, right, is actually running on Docker. Naturally, if you're running things like Kubernetes, up to you. What you want. In my choice, I just chose it to run on Docker, but you can definitely run it on like things like Kubernetes or whatever you fancy. Yeah. The whole thing, if you look here from a source perspective, the DAG that you see here on the left, it will trigger the DBT code, and it will run actually a DBT, it will run the DBT files, and we'll expect the DBT files later so that I'll let you see. So what happens here is DBT will actually take the runbook, and actually it will load the data in the Snowflake table from the CSV file and perform the analytical engineering. Later when it runs, I will log into my Snowflake console just to allow you guys to see as well how the stock procedures, how everything is being created on the fly. But as a baseline, this is what happens end to end when we orchestrate a job from Airflow all the way to Snowflake, Snowpark using DBT Python modules. Yeah, so end to end, that's what happens, right? As mentioned, right, the source, right, you might be wondering, okay, but in Snowflake right now, there are things like tasks that is already supported within Snowflake. So why do I need even Airflow? Yeah, but naturally, like for example, if you're an external system, because I'm cognizant of the fact, if let's say you have external systems like other databases, OLTP databases that you need to move into the data warehouse centrally, no matter what, you still need a way to actually grab the data and push it across. The task still only work specifically within Snowflake. That's why we use Airflow still to actually do that handshake right between the source and destination systems. Yeah, right. So before I go on here and I open up the VS Code and allow you guys to take a look, I'm just going to see if there's any other questions before I continue.
The SDG orders.py only stores the SQL that only have one layers representing the model, right?
Yes, correct. Inside the stg_customers.py, this is Python code. This is using the DBT Python models, not the, remember we have DBT SQL. This is the DBT Python code, which I will show you in my code later, what happens there. Yeah, so just hang on to your horses. I will let you take a look at my code.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. No other questions here? Okay, so let me just quickly go and showcase my environment 1 second, yeah? Let me just bring it up. Give me a minute. Okay, yep, so I think I have it here already. Let's take a look. Okay, so everyone can see my screen, I hope. Right, so basically what you see here, right, and I'm just going to move this down a bit and open this. Yeah, so you can see here, right, this is the Docker Compose file here that we have for our Airflow. I mean, those who have used Docker Compose, no big deal. This is the same old thing we run with Airflow. It's just that basically I adjusted it to actually point to actually run my DEX on my Airflow site, right? Onto my my DBT DEX basically. So if we take a look at actually the DBT Snowpark DBT, you can see under the models here, right? Basically this is a very simple example, right, of it using the Python DBT models. Now, once you actually have, like, for example, a dev model, you actually import, let's say, in this case, I'm using the Snowpark functions. So for example, here, we are importing the Snowpark functions. We are materializing it as a table. We are actually doing some goodbyes and actually do an order by. As I mentioned before, the syntax looks very similar to PySpark. So the first time when I started using Snowpark for DBT purpose, right, I was like, okay, this looks very similar to PySpark syntax. The whole context is the same here, right? It's just that from a DBT angle, right, they are now doing this whole push down and encapsulating it within stock procedure to push it over to Snowflake to run, right? So this is an example of actually one of the PY models, and you can see here that in each of these individual files, as what was pointed out earlier, that individual models. Remember what I said earlier, the basis lines, actually the concept of DBT is that one SQL file has one model. The same thing here, one Python file has one model over here. And you can see here that actually from here, I'm actually referencing my raw payments table. My stage customers also referencing my raw customers table, and it's actually doing different, let's say, transformations, very simple transformations, nothing too crazy at this point of time, right? So with all this, right, what happens is that I then define actually my source YAML. You can see that basically this is the source YAML for those people who have been using DBT before. no difference, right? It's actually kind of like the same thing that you're looking in terms of the raw data. I mean, the reference file. The only difference, as I mentioned before, is that instead of using SQL files, we are using actually the Python files here to use the Python models to communicate over to Snowflake to perform the push down of Python to Snowflake, right? For folks who are also on the core, right, who do not know what dbt does and so on and so forth, there's actually things like, for example, the seeds. This is actually seeding some data within Snowflake, right, using dbt. But of course, this is just a demo just to show you seeding of data. Traditionally, you should not be trying to use a seed function. Maybe you basically your system, your data should be from, let's say, a Postgres database or some other OLTP database, right? You shouldn't be storing your data in CSV. That's not the best practice usually. Yeah. And then from here, right, we have our project file, our profile files, and our user data. So not going too much into that, but essentially that is actually the whole dbt setup that we have here. Now, in terms of actually the Docker Compose file here, when Docker Compose was actually being launched and being readied, what happens is that under our requirements.txt file, what happens is that I installed the pandas, the dbt Snowflake, and as well as the dbt core. So this is the three important libraries that are actually being installed when it's being leveraged to be used, right, inside the whole dbt ecosystem. So what happens now that you see is that when the whole Docker Compose of Airflow comes up, it will actually communicate to talk to dbt in the back end, grab the dbt files, and then actually run the dbt files and schedule the dbt files on the same Docker instance, and then push the code down to Snowflake to run actually the Python code. So I'll be going over to Airflow next to allow you guys to take a look when I actually run the deck, what happens. Yeah. But any questions here in terms of actually dbt side or anything else that you guys want to check through with me before I carry on? Seems there's no questions here. Everything is good. Okay. So that's great. All right. So let's go on to basically the Airflow side, right? How does this talk to Airflow and so on and so forth? Now we go over to Airflow, and I'm just going over to here. So this is the Airflow instance that you see here, right? These are all my decks that we have in here available. What happens is that I have parameterized the run. So like, for example, so that it stores my variables and configurations here. So I have dbt password and dbt user. This dbt user and dbt password is the variables that's being used to communicate to Snowflake to actually perform the push down. And I will go over to the Snowflake console later to let you guys take a look what happens there once I click the run task, right? But essentially what happens is that if we look at the deck function from the Airflow deck, and let me just go over to here. Yep, if we go over to the deck here, you can see that basically I declared a Snowpark Python dbt deck and actually Snowpark dbt Airflow deck. And it's here, it's actually passing in the dbt username and dbt password. And it's actually running the Airflow, is seeding over to the Airflow dbt folder that we had just now and running the profile directory to deploy the dbt code over there. So in essence, right, this is the orchestration here. As mentioned, this is very simple. But what happens is that you have corresponding systems that are, let's say, upstream, let's say your Postgres database or your other Oracle databases or your other CSV files, or sorry, your other source systems. Then after Airflow will be the central person that will be talking to these different areas, right? And doing the transformation with dbt. Yeah, doing the pushing the data to dbt and then doing the transformations in there. Yeah. So dbt will be talking to Snowflake where all the data is stored centrally and doing all the transformation. Any questions here before I carry on? None? Okay, great. So I'll carry on here. Then after that later, we can definitely have more questions if you guys have any concerns, any issues, then we can carry on from there. Yeah. So let's go back to our decks. And you can see here that basically here over to the decks. And where's my deck? Yeah, there you go. Okay, so I have my deck here. All right, and you can see that basically this is the deck that has been run. I'm just going to do a simple run of the deck that you can see here, and I'm going to trigger the deck and for it to run. And you can see that right now it's running. So let's log on to our Snowflake environment to just take a look how things are over there. And let me just go over to here. 1 minute. Okay, so I'm just going to log over to here. Okay, so right now the DAG is running. While it's running, you can see basically, let's go to Snowflake, right? Take a look what happens there. And I'm just going over to the activity console, right? So for Snowflake, for those folks who are looking at Snowflake for the first time, Snowflake is a data cloud platform. It first started off as a data warehouse in 2012 from a stealth mode, and then right now, right, it's actually forming as it's now being actually acting as a central data cloud. So essentially, you can pump in your semi-structured, structured, unstructured data into Snowflake. But the easiest thing, I would say, from a technical perspective, I mean, kind of like platforms, right? If you think about it, they all offer the same nature about storing data, so on and so forth. The easiest part about Snowflake is actually the manageability. So easily, I can help to manage stuff within Snowflake very easily. I do not need to go and figure how to configure, like, for example, connecting like some external table or whatever into Snowflake, pumping into Snowflake and then copy the data out. Is that seamless from a usability perspective? So you can see that basically when the DAX is being pushed over to Snowflake or being run, right, Snowpark for DBT, right, is actually running here. Now, whatever that we had in terms of our DAX, and maybe we take a look here, you can see that in the background, right, it's creating the stock procedures within Snowflake for it to run. And you can see here, this is actually using a stock procedure. In the background, right, this is all being handled by DBT. So whatever that was created just now that we see in this code, right, and I'm just going over to my old code just now. Where did I put it? Oh, yeah, here. Yeah, okay. And I'm just going over to the models here. Yeah, so you can see that whatever thing is being done here, what happens in the background, right, is that it's actually writing the code as a stock procedure for you to run. And then after it's encapsulating all this, right, for you to run onto Snowflake. So in the next time, right, if let's say I need to call this Python function in the future or this stock procedure, I can just call it there. Yeah. So easily then I can help to use this to recall all my procedures centrally with Snowflake just using the DAX, the stock procedures from Snowflake, correct? So you can see that basically when it starts running and we take a look at the activity, we can see that basically in the background, already the DBT code from the Snowpark Python module is being pushed down to Snowflake. It's actually changing whatever, it's actually encapsulating this code within here to actually perform the transformation. Then you can see that in the background, it's creating and replacing all the tables that we actually declared before and doing the joins. This is in the background, right? As I mentioned before, two parts to this is that DBT is pushing down this code over to Snowflake, right? Once it has this stock procedure, it will execute this stock procedure and it will actually translate it in the SQL backend, right, to be able to run as a SQL engine. In the end, right, Python is being transformed natively within SQL to run on the SQL engine on Snowflake to perform the transformations. Yeah, so that's what happens in the background when it actually helps to perform this transformation. Now, with this, what happens is that you're then able to actually see, like, for example, the whole transformation in Snowflake. You can see that basically if we go back to the deck, it has actually run successfully. You can check the logs, right, that it has been done successfully. The push down is done already. But from here, from a Snowflake angle, right, then you're able to see different things. Like, for example, whatever items I have actually coded and actually brought to Snowflake just now, we can actually track it quite easily from here. I just probably want to just highlight one thing that you can see that basically what happens is that in the background, it's actually creating transient tables, right? There's actually a transient table. There's transient table in Snowflake, right? What happens is that you can think of it like a temporary table, yeah, to actually help you to actually hold your transformations within there. So with the integrations between Snowflake and DBT, you can actually use things like materialized views, and it's even transient tables to actually help hold your transformation data. So the whole purpose of us having transient tables is so that you can think of it as an intermediary stage to hold your transformation results before it's being pushed over into the final table. Yeah. So that's what happens in the background as well. If I hover over to the DBT Python Snowpark modules, right, and let you guys take a look, and maybe I will just go down to DBT's website. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the one that I was talking about just now about it being DBT Python modules. You can see that right now it only supports specific data platforms, and right now it's in DBT Core 1.3 and above. So for folks who are interested in using DBT Python, this is something that's available now for you to go and test it out. Yeah. So from a Snowflake angle, right, or actually from here, right, you can see that basically if we take a look into here, the dbt Python module, right? What happens is that it reads the dbt sources that we saw just now and goes transform it to the end state. It's similar to the role of a CTE that you think about it in terms of using it to pull the merges and upstream data right into the final version, and it will create the view and as well as table or any more complex DDL statements, right? That needs to be saved to the database in the background. So the syntax is like what I mentioned just now. Of course, from a technical perspective, there are of course some potential caveats. But if you take a look here, right, if let's say we look at 1.5 for now, you can see that for first now it supports both Snowpark and PySpark. Snowpark is what I actually built just now to show you what happens here. There are actually other things you can do with it. Now, those are actually what we call UDFs here, right? You can see that basically I'm doing here, what is happening, right, is doing a simple calculation. But dbt, what happens, right, is that when you actually write this module and push it down into Snowflake as well, this will actually be created as a UDF function that then you can actually leverage to use it in your future SQL jobs. Of course, this is a very simple one. It's a scalar function that's just adding things, but you can do more things because with the whole of it being worked with actually our Snowflake working with Anaconda, there are more things you can actually import and use within Snowflake for it to run. Yeah, so this is a simple example from the DPT website to Snowflake, but yes, this just gives you an idea about the UDF functions. Okay, so I'm just probably going to go down and just allow you to also see one thing. Yeah, so for packages, right, if we want to actually configure the required packages so that dbt can actually use and track them, you can actually do a dbt config and pass in the packages here. Now, in the Snowflake angle, when it's being passed down onto Snowpark, which is Snowflake side, it's of course communicating to Snowflake, right, to pick up the relevant Snowflake packages. And these packages, right, are actually being maintained here. So if I go over to my worksheets, right, and I just open up Python worksheet here, and let us take a look at actually all the packages, right? The let me just choose the database one. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So not like that. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. So you can see that basically from a Snowflake angle, right? These packages are all stored onto Snowflake already, and you can then leverage on, let's say, the relevant package that you want, like NumPy and Pandas. Of course, here is then what happens is that when you write the dbt model here, it's communicating to Snowflake to actually use this package for it to be deployed within Snowflake. Yeah. But separately, what happens is that you can also bring your own stage packages. So if let's say you have some custom code or whatever, right, that you want to actually stage the file and use it within Snowflake to run, you can stage the file inside a staging area and then leverage it to create UDFs. So let me just, yeah, correct. So I think Evan asked just now about the UDF functions. So this is the whole UDF function that you can use as a decorator. You can as well actually create it. You can just simply, like for example, this is the UDF capability to register a UDF. So this once this UDF is being run, it will register it permanently with, I think permanently, yeah. You register it permanently as a UDF within Snowflake there. Yeah. Right. So there's the other documentation here that you can see from a Snowflake dbt perspective. But yeah, you can see how these installing packages are being used here, and it actually gives you quite good details, right, about how Snowpark is supporting several packages by Anaconda. And this was what I was talking about earlier. Yeah. The whole reason why dbt has been adding all these, right, as mentioned, was because because we started on with Python, then they started getting onto it and started developing these modules out within Python itself. Any other questions? Any questions here before I carry on? No questions? Okay, cool. So I think, like for example here, you can see that basically this is a task graph that has actually gone. You can see the deck really get the variables and has really run. You can of course actually check the audit log. This is standard Airflow that you can actually track in and actually see the thing. So nothing too sexy here. It's kind of like for folks who have been using Airflow, very easy to be using this, right? But I think the whole thing, if we actually bring it back to here, the summary here is that basically, if I bring it back to this architecture, you can see that centrally, right, we are able to actually build out one whole data pipeline easily just using Python. Not too much things I need to build on top. There were a few lines of SQL codes, not even SQL, Python code to help us actually do our transformations of our data. then we actually have an Airflow deck to help to orchestrate dbt container. So for it to be able to do the transformations onto Snowflake from that whole transformation perspective. Yeah. Of course, as mentioned, whatever I presented was pretty straightforward. There's actually even more advanced stuff, right? That's actually being built out using the Snowpark and dbt that you guys can take a look. I can send some articles after the call for the other folks who are interested in reading it. If not, there's actually my Medium blog. In my Medium blog, I actually blocked down this whole setup, in fact. So I actually have a Medium blog as well, and you're free to actually go over to take a look, right, in terms of actually how this whole setup was being done. And essentially, this gives a step-by-step of how it was being done from that perspective. Yeah, so you can go in and test it out, see how it works, and play with it. Yeah, the whole point of here, right, is to allow you guys to actually understand it and better be able to see whether it brings more value to your work. Yeah. So I kind of think I'm way ahead of time. I'm at 7:46 now. I think I'm 15 minutes earlier. But I think that's about all my session. I'm just going to open up the floor for any Q&A. Is that okay, Teck Chun, that I open it up earlier for Q&A?
Sure, Adrian, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can open up the floor for any Q&A. And yeah, since ended earlier, then if there's like any questions, we can take the time now and I can address them. Yeah. Any questions at all?
Hi, Adrian.
Hey, who is this? Sorry.
Hi, I'm Shidong.
Hey, Shidong, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for sharing all this experience you have been using dbt.
Yeah.
Also Airflow. I just have one idea in mind that usually how do you structure your dbt and Airflow like orchestration unit? As you can see, dbt you can run all the tables according to the dependencies, but this may not be the ideal case for Airflow, because in Airflow, you may not be able to see the lineage and task dependencies, right? So what kind of orchestration unit you would be good in your mind?
You mean in terms of seeing the wow, good question. Yeah, because I know where you're coming from lah. Airflow doesn't have that whole like lineage capability, right? Yeah. So but okay, so the thing, right, is that if it's centrally all within Snowflake, let's say your source and destination, because if we go with the whole ELT approach, right? Technically, actually, even if it's outside, yeah, technically, I mean, from a data perspective, the data lineage perspective, definitely I will still be using dbt to actually help me visualize actually the passing of data, because dbt centrally, right, it helps me to track that. But from a task orchestration perspective, right, to track the lineage, I'm not sure if Airflow has that capability now. I remember it didn't have. I was exploring things like Prefect before. But I also remember Prefect didn't really have that built-in capability to do that. So for your question, right, Shitong, for now, I also am still wondering what is I also don't really have an answer for that one. I'm still investigating that one as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Adrian. This is Ping Feng here. So for Shitong's question, right? Actually, in my previous organization, we have tried using Dexter combined with dbt and also Snowflake together. So, example, we use Python to do extraction, then followed by using dbt to do the transformation. So, how this works is so for the extraction part, the Dexter will have will be an asset by itself. So everything in Dexter itself is an asset. So once the extraction part is loaded, right, it can identify the dbt models, then it will show the whole data lineage. So I think maybe Shitong can find towards the Dexter.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that as well for Dexter. Which company was this you worked for before? I mean, just interested that you were using Dexter.
Rim sustainability.
Rim sustainability.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. Okay, so that's a pretty interesting one. I didn't know about the whole Dexter to DBT one. Yeah, I'll check that one out as well. That's something new for me that I didn't know lah. Yeah. Sorry, can I get your name again one more time?
My name is Ping Feng. Bingfeng.
Bingfeng. Okay, got it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Since I'm here, right, then I have a question. So regarding the DBT, right? So DBT allows you to generate the docs to see the lineage.
Yes.
So according to the documentation in DBT, I think they say that it's best to store the docs onto a place where your whole organization can see this JSON that is created. So, so may I know, do you have like any articles on Medium that stores this, and then like anyone on the organization can go to like maybe a Flask or something to click on which data pipeline is this and view the whole lineage? Yeah. So that's my question.
Good question. I had this same exact one before to allow question to allow everyone commonly to use a common lineage. I forgot what was it I was exploring before. So there is a company, right, that actually helped to not really productionize the whole lineage capability. Okay, so just to be very clear, to store the DBT lineage, from what I know, right now everything is still on my side, right, being stored locally. To actually store it elsewhere, for now I haven't explored what can be stored externally to see the whole lineage capability lah. Yeah, but the lineage one thing I was reading before was using something, I forgot what's the tool's name. It was using something called Marquise. Is it Marquise? Marquez, if I'm not wrong, to visualize the lineage metadata. But that only visualizes it, but it doesn't help with the whole like storing of that metadata and then giving everyone access to it. So that's something that I am also I probably have to explore that one as well, because I'm not sure as well how most people are storing the lineage separately outside in a remote store. Yeah.
On this one, I can provide some info. So for the lineage, right, if you are using DBT's commercial product called DBT Cloud, then the cloud is a place where you can host the lineage kind of like centrally, and everybody can see. And if you don't want to use this commercial product, then probably you can utilize some HTML or static website hosting tools. For example, you put all the generate docs into a S3 bucket and then make it publicly available to your organization. Then everybody can see it because it's a static website. And another tool I'm aware of is called Data Hub. So it is a data cataloging tool. So it can import it multiple these data lineage information from different tools, not only DBT. So if you are using Data Hub, then definitely you can import the DBT generate docs inside Data Hub, and everybody can access this information.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning Data Hub lah, is it, Shitong?
Oh yeah.
Okay, can. Yeah, okay, got it. The one that I remember the name of that one now. But it's also a commercial tool from what I know. It's called Alvin. Then it allows you to import as well. But the other method that you did suggest, right, Shitong, we should put in the S3 bucket, that one makes sense. But of course, then you have to stitch it together to move all the actually the metadata, of course, and then after that visualize it . Yeah.
Hello, I'm Aaron again. Actually, I have a major confusion after I know how DBT run and how DBT take effective. I have a question for Adrian and also Xudong. Because I see that DBT will abstract every step, every Spark step to a model-like things. Like in DBT, there will be a model that represent a circle procedure. If we generate data in that way, we have no control of the server. We have no control of Spark shell. So if my circle or if my model writes wrongly or not good or some issue in my model, I cannot I push a jar file and I start a Spark shell and I run a little bit of code to test a little bit to check if my code is good or not, to apply some debug skills. So I think I'm a little bit lose control if I use DBT. Are there any typical debugging method if I use DBT?
Okay, so for DBT, actually there is a DBT unit test. I'm not sure if it's available in Python. Yeah, I'm not sure. But definitely within the SQL one, there's a DBT unit test. And if I'm not wrong, this DBT unit test packaging, it's done by I forgot his name, but this packaging, right, for the unit test, you can actually perform incremental unit tests with DBT. But for the whole logging output, regardless, right? If you need to log so like for example, when we remotely execute all this, if you actually implement it within a CI/CD workflow, let's say with GitHub Actions or any other form of CI/CD tooling, you can use this to actually perform the incremental unit tests on the DBT models. But the results, everything, right, you will still need to log it to somewhere to actually store it somewhere, right? For this, right, usually like some folks that I know before, especially when they do the unit testing, they do actually log all the incremental data also to Snowflake or an eventual database backend store to actually track all the logs from the angle. But I would say that that's how the unit testing as well as the incremental analysis of using DBT works when you're using the unit testing modules with DBT environment. Yeah. Correct. Shitong, do you have anything to add there?
No, probably similar views.
Yeah.
Because in my understanding, you are not very easy to show a sample of data when developing DBT models. Instead, most of the time you will have your model ready and the CTE is ready, and then just trying to production your pipelines using DBT.
Correct. Okay, so correct on that one. Actually what happens, right, as well is that whatever I ran just now was using the DBT run command. But basically what happens is that before it does the actual push, you can use something called DBT build. And the DBT build command, right, will actually help to also run models. There's also a test models, right? A test framework that you can actually run in there. And there's snapshots and seeds. For the test, right, if I actually just show you this document here for actually the DBT build. So one aspect is that we are talking about is the unit testing that I was talking about just now. And yeah, this is the one that I was mentioning just now that done by this gentleman here. Yeah, he built like for example, a unit testing of your DBT packages in order for you to do it. But usually the best framework, I mean, usually most of the time, right, is that people will do a DBT build. And the DBT build will actually run all these like statements here to test it out before you can actually do a DBT run. Whatever I did just now was pure DBT run without building a build beforehand. Yeah, so it actually start to actually track all these track all these modules one by one to see which has actually been started or passed or did not pass. Yeah, and if it failed, actually the whole thing will fail from a DBT build perspective. So maybe you might maybe one way to actually help to perform the incremental testing and debugging is to combine both the DBT build with actually the unit testing. Yeah, I think that's the most logical way of doing things. Yeah.
Okay, which means thanks you two gentlemen's answer. This means for if I use DBT, I only can do some mocked data and do some unit test for my model, but I cannot do a incremental test. And I cannot log in the actual server, use the real data, and only select a little bit and only run a little bit of my model code to verify if my model is wrong or right.
So selecting that small data set, actually that can be built inside your DBT SQL. Like for example, if you do, so in SQL, we have something called sample command, right? Sample to sample some data. So actually, if you sample out or actually get a portion of the data or build a view on top of it, of that data, right? Let's say you build a view on top of the data in Snowflake, you can actually call that view to actually use it as a pass integrate or pass that data into the DBT module. So you can see here that essentially, for example, here under each and every database, right? You can actually also have something what we call a view, and a view will only take, let's say maybe a subset of that data. Maybe if I just go down here to show. So maybe that's one other way that it can be done if you want to do the incremental testing. Yeah. So I'm just showing maybe one example here. If I have it here. Yeah, here. So for example, we can have like a test view, and the test view definition, okay, it's not a materialized view, but you can have the test view that actually selects some data samples from the actual table, and you can use that to pass it into the DBT model. Yeah.
Oh, got it. Thanks for the useful sharing.
Yeah, so that's what I would do, right? Before I even fire off the model, I would test it with that view. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's a pretty good technical, interesting conversation. And thanks very much for thanks much for BF for pasting that document. I'll take a look at Dexter. I heard about it, but I haven't had time to play with it before. So it's pretty interesting to hear about Dexter. Yeah, thanks for posting that. Okay. Any other questions from the folks around table? None? Okay, I think that's it from our end. I'll hand it back to Teck Chun.
All right, thank you, Adrian, and thank you for the community for all the exciting questions. I think we learned a lot as well today. In case you have any more questions, do ping Adrian. And so the best way to connect to you is through LinkedIn, is it, Adrian?
Yeah, you can connect me through LinkedIn. So let me just give my LinkedIn.
Yeah, you want to paste your LinkedIn profile, LinkedIn link on.
No worries.
Yeah.
Just
okay. Thank you very much. So I guess this session is recorded. I will try to get a copy of the recording from Roy and team and see whether I can post it to the meetup.com, right? And in case anyone wants to review this, right? All right. Thank you very much and for your time, and it's been a good 1 hour well spent. And I want to thank Adrian, even though it's virtual. I think it's very well done. Thank you very much, Adrian. Yeah, I look forward to further sharing from you in future.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely. I mean, if everyone new future sharings can be things like the whole external table formats kind of things for data engineering. The one has been very popular among a lot of data engineers recently. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, let's touch base again, Adrian. Yeah, we share that. Yeah, and I want to thank Roy and Emily for hosting this. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.